Jacob Tsotigh. I work for the University of Oklahoma. I work for a program. South Central Comprehensive Center is one of 16 federally funded technical assistance centers that help state departments of education in the implementation of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, of which Title VI is a part of. I work with 4 states, or our center has 4 states, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and New Mexico. My primary responsibilities are Oklahoma and New Mexico because they are the states with significant numbers of American Indian students. I work to support the state departments of education in both of those states, the Indian education programs or divisions or departments, and specifically the staff members to help build their capacity to implement elements related to ESEA, which is now Every Student Succeeds Act. And I'm so thankful that we moved away from No Child Left Behind because of the amount of accountability and reliance on standardized testing that became such a burden for our Native students to endure. Because I've always been a proponent of authentic assessment. I think that is the best way to measure our Native students' abilities. So we're moving a little bit away from that. We still have some accountability, which is necessary, and I recognize that that element in our educational processes. But at the same time, to recognize that as Native students, too many times our public schools focus on the deficits of our students and not on the strengths. And we need to really reassess that and look at how we can promote focusing on the strengths that our students come to the table with, which is Native languages, which is culture, which is a rich tradition and history, and our value systems as well. So I've been involved with Indian education. In a few years back, I became acquainted with Wichita. I got to work here to do professional development, both for the parent committees and for the district. I worked closely with Jeff Watkins, Dow's predecessor, and helped to support him when I was able to work with districts and schools. Dow called and asked if I could work with you guys, and I have to do it on my own time because I'm limited to working in my official function with the state departments. I cannot work with districts and schools. But I have a passion for the people. When I worked at Anadarko Public Schools, my greatest joy was working with the Indian Parent Advisory Committee because they were such a good group of advocates, and they needed to have a role in the process of education as a voice for our Native students because our policymakers there in Anadarko were non-Indian and did not have the perspective that was necessary for the promotion of our issues. And so the Parent Advisory Committee became a critical element in helping to guide the district in a number of ways. One of the more significant accomplishments I was proudest of was instituting the Kiowa Language 1 and 2, Kiowa 1 and 2 as part of the regular school curriculum before I left. It's still going on today, one of the most popular courses there in Anadarko Public Schools. And it is part of the regular school curriculum, not an elective, because it can fulfill the world language requirement. And so now we're getting language taught in the school system there. Good to see some old friends, Bob Marley. We got acquainted years ago, and I'm glad that he's still hard at it, being an advocate for our people. And there are others here that I know are committed to the journey. And it's not an easy thing because our students are marginalized. Our students are in the shadows. Our students are overlooked, like I mentioned, because they may not have the same skill sets that the other students bring. And because parents are not as actively engaged. We're not often, as Native parents, classified as helicopter parents. Because part of our cultural values is that we let our students, let our children grow according to how they perceive the processes around them. We model that for them. We don't tell them, we don't direct them. We give them the opportunity to learn from the examples. But what we instill in them is to value those things that need and are necessary for them to function at a high level as human beings, to have respect for our elders, to learn to listen and to observe, and to be able to engage after they've attained a certain level or skill. And so these are all critical issues that are part of who we are as Native people. In this situation where there's an urban element involved, where our students are somewhat displaced from their natural habitats, their places of origin, it becomes challenging. And that's where the role of the program is so critical. And it was good to hear some of the things that are being taught and learned by our students, because they need that in order to find their way in this society. They need that grounding in who they are. And so I applaud you and commend you. The academic part is critical, but so is the cultural part. Because if they don't know who they are, they cannot really deal with where they are going as effectively as they need to. So that's all a part of what Title VI now becomes. And that's why it's a part of the ESCA. Because years ago in the late 60s, Senator Robert Kennedy realized the role that Native people should be playing, and we're not. And so he gave a focus on our critical issues and challenges that we had. And that evolved into a Senate study, which evolved into authorizing legislation after he was taken from us. His brother, Senator Edward Kennedy, continued that advocacy. And so that the law became in effect in the early 70s and is still ongoing today. First, I want to give you an overview of what the program involves from a higher level. These are some of the basic elements that we will go over this evening in order to have a better understanding of what we do. The Every Student Succeed Act was passed in December of 2015, and we're now in the process of finalizing the rules and regulations that we will have to abide by with all the title programs. Of course, the major title program that most school districts receive significant funding is Title I. And that primary focus of Title I comes from socioeconomic status based on free and reduced school lunches. And so this district has significant numbers, and I would estimate that they do, a significant number of students who are below the free and reduced lunch level, then the district receives significant funding into the millions to address issues related to reading and math, the core elements. ESSA included a kind of a realignment. Other than Title I, the titles moved around somewhat. And so we're going to become, in 2017, Title VI. We are now urging our grantees to refer to themselves as Title VI. And that's not surprising. I started in Title IV, and it became Title V, went to Title IX, came back to Title VII, and now we're in Title VI. So we've been all over the chart in this legislation, but the significant thing is that we're still there. We're still a part of it, so that's significant. The purpose of Title VI is to support the efforts of Wichita Public Schools, Indian tribes in this area, and organizations in this area to help in developing elementary school and secondary school programs for Indian students that are designed to meet the unique cultural, language, and educational needs of our students, and to ensure that all of our students meet the challenging Kansas state academic standards. And Kansas has bought into the Common Core system and are still a part of that, right? So that they'll continue to proceed with that in addressing and aligning their local programs based on that. Title VI is based on that 506 student count. And he mentioned there are significant numbers of students who are counted but not included in the count. And so it becomes imperative for him and his staff to go and work the field and see if they can increase that number. 1,400 is significant. It's a nice size program. But anytime you can add to that in significant numbers, you increase opportunity to provide more services. You increase the opportunity to provide more program activities that can help to engage that student. And it's important for the administrative side of it to be as effective as they can to get the information out about enrolling. It's very easy. All it takes is a parent's signature, a date on the form, and that's it, as long as it's connected back to someone who is an enrolled member. And for some of our tribes, based on descendancy, that goes down to 1/500 and something degree of Indian blood. And so, our blonde-haired, blue-eyed students are very much Indian, can be part of that count. So we should make every effort to make sure that we maximize that student count. And there's a count period. DAL will have 30 days and usually it's toward the beginning of school when you have the most number of students enrolled coming back before they're discouraged and begin to go back home or go back to grandma and grandpa's, so that you have the most students available. But it's a consecutive day, September 1st to September 30th, that you have to count your students and submit that as your official count. And so any 506 forms that are received after, if it's September 1st through the 30th, if it's October 1, they cannot be counted and included in the student count. BIE-funded schools may use the 506 forms too. I don't think there are any BIE schools in this. There's a tribally controlled school up north, I think. But they have to address these issues in a very different way. Indian is defined by statute. The 506 form determines who an eligible Indian student is. Only parents or legal guardians may sign certifying that that child is an Indian. And once completed, the 506 forms are good until that child graduates. And if they move away, I always just put them in an inactive file. Because Anadarko was a very mobile school district. They were coming in and out. They would go to Riverside. They would come back. And so you could put them back in once they come back into school. So it's always a good idea to keep them on file. They're going to have a new form, and it's maybe available now. So if Dal has a copy of that, that's the form you should use when you sign up new students from this point on. But the old forms are still valid, and you may still utilize those for your verification. Okay, there are two parts. Dal will have to submit the first part in January, February, which is basically a student count and the type of organization he is, or the type of applicant he is. And we have two new elements. One is an Indian organization. So let's say if Wichita Public Schools decided they did not want to apply for a Title VI grant, Dow was just too much trouble and they wanted to look at another way. So you could possibly look at one of the organizations that exist here. I think there's a health board that is kind of Indian, and one for the Indian Center that could be a Native organization. So there's an alternative for the Native students if the district chooses not to, if it becomes burdensome or for whatever reason. The part of the application is most critical because you're going to give a description of the programs, your grant objectives, and what type of activities you propose to have. You will have to submit your parent committee approval form, and then you have to do all your assurances that your program is in compliance with ED requirements. Eligible applicants include, again, Wichita's was it ISD or USD is the applicant. They also can include Bureau-funded schools, and Indian tribe can fund. In Oklahoma, we have a couple where the district, the money is not significant enough for the district to do anything with, and so they choose not to do all the paperwork. So a tribe in the area that has 50% of the student enrollment can submit an application. And I think we have two in Oklahoma that the Indian tribes administer. Again, I mentioned two new applicants who are eligible are Indian organizations and Indian community-based organizations. So those are two new applicants that can apply. But that's only if the district chooses not to. You can also have consortium applicants, where you can have a combination of LEAs, Indian tribes, or Indian organizations. In some of the smaller rural school districts, it's kind of a good tool, a good vehicle for them, because they don't have enough students to really have a full-time employee or some type of a major project. So if they pool their resources together, then they can really make a more meaningful program. So these are some of the elements under Part 1, signed consortium agreement, signed evidence of the student count. And then the Part 2 would be your parent committee approval, and then a copy of your indirect cost rate and administrative cost limit waiver request if you go over a certain percentage in your administrative cost. All applicants must include this year, for the first time, some mention of a meaningful collaboration with tribes that are impacted within your 50-mile radius. So I'm not sure which tribe, if the Kaw comes within that, or Tonkawa. But if there's a tribe that has some jurisdiction in here, the district will be required to seek input in some type of forum. And they will have to sign off that they indeed have been given an opportunity to collaborate and to hear. The district will have to tell about each one of the title programs, not just Title VI, but Title I, Title II, Title III. And then there will the tribes will be given an opportunity to give feedback and input. And the district will have to say what it did with that feedback and how they conducted the consultation, what the process consisted of. And that's only good if you receive over $40,000 in funding for Title VI, or you have over 50% American Indian student population. So the dollar amount applies to Wichita, not the student count. And that doesn't go into effect until next year. And if the district chooses to make Title VI a part of the Title I school-wide program, which gives the district more flexibility in incorporating or integrating all of the title programs together to design one approach, you have to approve that. The parent committee has to approve participation in a school-wide program. And again, the smaller districts, it is beneficial for them sometimes to have that when they can integrate all their federal funding resources. In Part 2, you will give your objectives, activities that support Native language programs or Native American language restoration programs, which could be a part of your district, but I understand that because of the variety of tribal representation, that is not really something that can be addressed in a good way. In Anadarko, the Kiowa tribal language, tribal students represented 50% of the student population. So it made sense for us to bring in that language program because the majority of our students came from that tribal group. Activities to educate individuals to prevent violence, bullying, that type of thing. Suicide or substance abuse may be addressed in your programs. You can also have dropout prevention strategies and strategies to meet the educational needs of at-risk students who are in correctional facilities, including such strategies that support Indian students who are transitioning from such facilities to schools served by local education agencies. And that's something to look into because it's really there are some disparities in our juvenile justice system where our Native students are put into the system at higher numbers than they represent. And so it becomes a challenge for them once they're put into those institutions for them to receive an adequate and equal opportunity, educational opportunity. And so in Norman, our Indian education program does a lot of outreach to those. There are several group homes, juvenile facilities, and so they work very effectively trying to keep them up to the regular school program so that they can reintegrate back as seamlessly as possible. And our director there has done a tremendous job in trying to give access to those students who find themselves in those unfortunate circumstances. You are not allowed to provide curriculum development, which integrates local knowledge, language, and culture. And I'm not really sure about where that comes from. But I'll give Dal more information on that as that becomes. This is some limitation. Funds provided to a grantee under this subpart may not be used for long-distance travel expenses for training activities that are available locally or regionally. So the district will have to keep a watch on that to ensure that you get the most out of your training dollars in order to have be as efficient as possible with the use of federal funds. And the open consultation should have the following: parents of Indian children and teachers and representatives of Indian tribes on Indian lands located within 50 miles of any school that have students from that particular tribe, Indian organizations, and Indian students from secondary schools. So all those are eligible to participate in an open consultation. Now here's where Dal wanted me to emphasize the role of the parent committee. It's challenging because meeting every month without compensation, or your time is critical because you have a family to raise. So it becomes really a role that is altruistic, one that you're committed to, because it moves you beyond being required into one where you want to serve. And it's a critical element for the effective administration of this program. We have to have parent involvement. We have to have your perspective, because without it, we can't be as effective as we need to be in meeting the critical needs for the district students in this district. So it takes the home. It takes you working with the district in a good way to really give our students a good chance, the best chance of being academically successful. And the district wants that diversity. They need that diversity here at the schoolhouse door. And that's the element that is being promoted with the consultation process, that we need the input from all stakeholders. Our parents play a critical role as stakeholders in this district. And if you allow programs to be developed without your input, then you're missing an opportunity to serve the district in a good way. And so I urge, I know it's hard to find people willing, because sometimes we can be our own worst enemy as tribal people. We allow ourselves sometimes to succumb to the lowest common denominator and get into personal rivalries and personality differences. So we have to rise above it, and we have to commit ourselves to the greater good. And so that's where you devote and focus your energies on the goals of the program, on the objectives of the program, and don't fight among yourselves about things that are really irrelevant or not meaningful in a good way. It's challenging, but an effective parent advisory committee will take their role very seriously and with a mindset that they are going to accomplish things regardless of how they feel or work together. So that's what I encourage in any kind of a system that is progressive and forward-thinking. Oh, and this is a picture. I included that. This is my grandson, and you can barely see it. My wife and I, when she worked at Anadarko, we had a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old when we moved to Norman. And they moved into elementary school. She would have to get up before 6 in the morning and leave to go to Anadarko because it was almost 60 miles from Norman. And so that was my role. I was the mother and father for our two. They both graduated from Norman Public Schools. And so I was involved. I would go to the school on a regular basis. I was the homeroom mother. I would bake for them or go out and buy something for them. I would go on field trips with them. I would even go to the school and ask what I could do and end up many times changing the marquee at their school to help in any way I could, because it was critical to me that one of us fill that role. And she was doing a greater good too, because like I said, Anadarko was over 60% Native students. And in her classroom, there would be 15, 20 out of 30 students who were Indian. And so she became a surrogate mother to many of them. And Anadarko has many challenges for our Native people. And so she needed and was compelled to be there. And so I worked that as a parent and was involved as much as I can to model for my kids. Well, they went through Norman Public Schools. We have an older son. He's a few years older, and he started having a family. He had two boys, and they lived in Norman, and they got into some challenges with substance abuse. And so we became their main security. And so we helped to raise them from the time they were born. And they moved away 3.5 years ago, to Kentucky. And we raised them until they were 12 and 11. And so that was difficult for us to let go after playing that critical role for them. Well, this is my grandson that on the year that they left, he received 5 or 6 academic achievement awards. And we were so proud of him because he did that in spite of the challenges his mom and dad had. And they were not always present there in his life. And so it really made us feel good that he was able to work through the emotional, the mental anguish that may have been there, to elevate his academic journey. And we're thankful for him. He's continued to develop, and now he's a really outstanding athlete. He's a football player, a basketball player, so he's very well-rounded. In fact, just recently, this past fall, my daughter-in-law texted me and asked me if I had a few minutes to talk about something that had happened. And so when I did, she explained that her son, his name is Delson, had experienced some racism on his football team. And there were like 3 or 4 African-American athletes. And one of their teammates had called them a name, and you know what name it was. And so I immediately jumped into the situation and called the principal and called the superintendent, and finally got through to the athletic director and told him of my concerns. And he assured me that they would address the issue as best that they could. And so my daughter-in-law wanted me to talk to my grandson because he was threatening to quit the team. He felt so depressed about it. And so I got on the phone and talked to him, visited with him about it, and encouraged him and tried to uplift him and let him know he couldn't let them get the best of him. He couldn't let them win. If you do that, you walk away, they win. So you stay in there and you be strong. And you rely on those values that you learned when you were here in Oklahoma. And he listened and he said, okay, Grandpa, I will. And then right at the very end, he said, oh, and Grandpa, it's my last game of my basketball season. And the game is Monday. Can you come to my last game? And this was Friday. He called and said that. And I called him and talked to him about it. And what does grandparents do? We loaded up that Sunday, and we made the journey to Kentucky. And it was his last football game. That's what it was. It was last football game. So we went, and it was 6 o'clock. They were playing a team that was like 15 miles away. So We got there right at 6. We were hustling to get into our seats. And as we were going to sit down, one of the other parents that was there already turned and said, "Oh, you missed it." And they knew who we were because not any other natives in that town. "You missed it. Your grandson just ran for 60 yards, a 60-yard touchdown." We were shocked and stunned. We'd come all that way and I missed that. But we were so proud of him. And I think part of that was, he was thankful that we were going to be there. And so he did his very best. And so that's what happens. That's how, a child gets that from you. When they get positive reinforcement, they're going to try their hardest when they feel that love. And so that's what it comes down to. When you are here on a regular basis as a parent committee member and doing your best to make that journey a good one, and your child sees that, they're going to respond. And you're going to position that child to do well in their academic journey because you're showing them that you not only speak to that, your supportive education, you work hard at doing it. You work hard at staying committed, and you want to be an advocate in a good way. Your parent committee membership, Dal went over that a little bit. Parents and family members of the Indian children who are enrolled in the district. They may also come from representatives of those tribes located within the 50-mile radius of the district. You should also have teachers on the parent advisory, and I think you guys do that, and secondary students whenever possible. But a majority of your parent advisory committee should be parents of Native students. Sometimes districts kind of try to stack the deck, and they'll add staff members, more staff members, so that they can be a rubber stamp for whatever the district wants to do. But they are out of compliance when they do that because the majority, the guidelines call for and regulations require, majority of parent advisory committee members come from parents. The role of the parent committee to be participatory, help support in whatever way you can, and your monthly meetings is one of the ways. You help to develop your bylaws that are consistent with your LEA policies and procedures. You help with the project development, giving input on what objectives you feel would best serve your student population, assessing your project performance on a regular basis so you might see where one's not working and you might have a suggestion of another objective that would be more effective in meeting the needs of your students. And then also to serve in the development of specific project policies and procedures. As advisory to the LEA, you recommend staff employment. You evaluate applicants and you make a list of recommendations. Now, the district may decide someone else within that list or outside that list, and they can do that because they become the final say. But a good school district, one that really wants to have a meaningful relationship with the program, will generally take the recommendation, and that's important. You work as part of the project evaluation. Again, you see what's working and what's not because you're closest to the program. And you review your project services and activities based on your student needs on a regular basis. The application itself must be approved. You have a parent approval form that each member of the committee must sign that will have to be submitted with your application. And if your district chooses to integrate Title VI into school-wide under Title I, it has to be approved. They cannot do it without parent approval. What you cannot do is set policies and procedures for the LEA. You cannot develop bylaws that are not consistent with LEA policies or approved by the LEA. You may not hire, fire, or supervise LEA or project staff. You make recommendations, but it's up to the district to decide to make the final determination. And parent committee members cannot review personnel records, cannot review 506 forms, cannot commit or obligate funds for the LEA, or directly administer the program. And we talked about the eligibility form of the 506 forms, and this spells this out. Any questions?
I do have one, Jacob.
Yeah, Dal.
whenever they move over to this new Title VI, do they, you said on there that, because in the past it's always the parent approval form, it's always been, 6, and I think this past year we had to have 8 signatures. Will it be still a set amount of signatures, or just everybody in the parent committee?
I think it's everybody on the parent committee. It's everybody in the parent committee that you can get. Now, there'll be some instances where you'll miss connection.
Will it be like a minimum?
No, they will not. Yeah, they will not, as long as you make the effort. Okay, here's my contact information. Any of you have a question, and I have a listserv, and Dow's a part of that. I send information out regularly, and sometimes too regularly. I get people who say, take me off that list. But it's good information. I give scholarship information. I give information from a national perspective. I'm connected to OIE, so their announcements, or ED, their announcements, I send those out. And it's great information for you as parents and resources. So if you would like to be on that list, drop me an email line, and I'll be glad to add your name to that. And you'll have this when Dow sends it to you. There are some other resources that you'll have available when you get this PowerPoint that you can look into. And they're all housed on ed.gov. If you go to that website, you'll see all the title programs, and there you'll get to download information specifically related to Indian education. And it's very helpful information. One of the things that was done that I was very thankful for, and again, it's connected back to my grandson, was that there is a program called the White House Initiative on American Indian and Alaska Native Education. It was part of the administration's executive order that came out a few years ago to help improve Indian education, or the processes of Indian education. And it was under the leadership of William Mendoza for the past 4 years. And he did such a good job. He held a series of listening sessions throughout the country. I think the closest one to you guys might have been in Tulsa a couple of years ago. He came to Oklahoma City a couple of years ago, and he got input, comments from parent committee members, from students who were involved with Title VII, from administrators from throughout the country. And he issued a report. If you will Google the White House Initiative on American Indian Alaska Education, you can download a copy of the report, and this is what it looks like. And you'll get some insight into some of the critical issues that are confronting our Native students. I mentioned he came to Oklahoma City, and one of the main goals of the listening session was to address issues related to school climate. And we know that's always a challenge for our students of color. Because sometimes they're not as welcome, they're not as embraced and nurtured as they should be. And so during his Oklahoma City tour, he got a lot of comments about the issue related to mascots. And the comments dealt with specifically some of the names there in Oklahoma City, and specifically one for one of the high schools, and I think you guys might have a challenge here as well. And when an administrator from Oklahoma City Public Schools was a part of that listening session, she was there to observe, and she heard something. Oh, there was also mention of the land run that many of the elementary schools still use in Oklahoma. And so the very next day, the Oklahoma City School District issued a memorandum that there would be no more land run celebrations in Oklahoma City elementary schools. So that was significant. Well, the very next month, the Oklahoma City School Board brought up a vote, prior to that, an input from the community about changing the name of that school. Capitol Hill was the name of the school. And so our Native people flooded the school board meeting and gave input. And at the end of the input, the school board voted unanimously to change the name. And a part of that was the hearing, the listening session. And at that listening session, I gave my testimonies in here. As a private citizen, I couldn't come as a part of my federal role. But my comment was, and it deals with my grandson, when they initially moved to Kentucky, they moved into a district that utilized our native heritage. His middle school was the Richmond Braves. And so him and his brother were new students, and they both have hair down to the middle of their back. And immediately when they moved in, some of the students began to bully them by ridiculing them. And it became overwhelming. One night, my grandson called me and said, Grandpa, I want to come home. I want you to fly me home. I can't live here. The students are saying that I'm their mascot. I'm the school's mascot. And that was very heartbreaking for me. I was so torn because I couldn't remedy it right away. I knew his parents would let me bring him back. So I tried to encourage him as much as I could. And I mentioned that in here. And I mentioned the challenges that many of our native students experience that kind of a situation. And there was no change, but other than the fact that my grandson became very committed. And I said he blossomed into a very good athlete. And so that mitigated some of that bullying, because when you become a star athlete, you gain an element of success and recognition. And it has become a very effective tool. So he made it through. But that's an example, a very personal example, of what some of our native students endure because of that. And it's part of what I do is to challenge. And I went to another school board meeting in a small community outside of Oklahoma City, about 30 miles, and they had the same name. And I gave testimony about the report and about some of the national issues and how we focused on that. And the local community said, no, we're not offended. We want the name. We're very proud of it. And so they kept it. And that's the choice they made. And so they have to live with it. But it's part of the advocacy that I have committed myself to over the past 30 years. Indian education is very critical. It gives voice to those students that I said are marginalized. It gives voice to them in ways that helps to empower them and the parents. It gives you an opportunity to be involved in the processes of education that are so important to the choices that student will make. So I encourage you to stay the course because in the long run, its change is not overnight. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a commitment. It takes a dedication and a constancy in order for change to happen. And so when you come together as a collective and when you work to improve the life of those students, educational life of those students, you become a tool for change. And it's important for us as Native people to raise that voice, to be that touchstone for those students and for the district, because you can be so effective in helping them address the critical issues of the day through the role that you play. And so I urge your continued determined effort in support of the district, in support of Dal and his staff, and the leadership of the district to continue to raise your voice. Aho, thank you.